He tried to choke my baby with a pool noodle, and you're calling it a compliance issue? That's what I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Across from me, Maribeth Drindle, president of the Brook Hollow Wreath HOA board, adjusted her sun hat with the same fingers that had just handed me a violation slip. Her tone? Calm, dismissive, like this was paperwork. I warned you about the oxygen cart, she said, gesturing toward my daughter's stroller like it was a pile of trash. You know the HOA doesn't permit obtrusive medical equipment near common water zones. My 8-month-old daughter was still in my arms, her tiny chest jerking as I adjusted the mask back into place. The pool noodle, still wet, still bent, lay beside us on the hot concrete, its end warped from where Lanik Drindle, Maribeth's teenage son, had shoved it into the oxygen intake like a toy, and then laughed. I looked at her. The air pump has an ADA registration number. The incident just triggered an insurance report, and your HOA's policy is about to get flagged. She blinked. Once. That was all. Subscribe now, because the HOA president's son nearly suffocated my child, and my Navy SEAL brother filmed every second. This neighborhood's silence ends today. I'm Corwin Haldor, Municipal Liability Assessor. I don't sue people. I file incident risk projections that get neighborhoods shut down and insurance rates tripled. I've been doing it for 12 years, quietly, anonymously, but today, I'm not being quiet. You want to know why I brought an oxygen tank to the pool? Because my daughter has pediatric pulmonary fibrosis. Her lungs collapse without assisted airflow when the humidity spikes. Her doctors warned me, avoid crowded areas, avoid heat, avoid stress. So, I brought her out at sunrise, tucked her under the umbrella, and set her up right beside the Marshwood cradle chair my late husband built by hand. That chair was the last thing he made before the cancer came back. He sealed it with his initials, not varnish. Said he wanted her to grow up in shade her father made. Maribeth tried to ban it. Non-uniform furniture, she said, visual inconsistency. But I held the line. I filed ADA notice. I kept it by the pool. And today, when I turned away for 10 seconds to refill a bottle, her son picked up a foam noodle, walked to my stroller, and jammed it straight into the oxygen mask intake. My daughter didn't scream. She twitched. I dropped the bottle, pulled the mask, switched to manual flow. My fingers were shaking, but I got her breathing. Just in time for Maribeth to walk over with a clipboard and tell me the problem was unauthorized personal medical gear. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I said exactly what I needed to. This entire pool deck is now part of an open insurance inquiry. The timestamp on that camera, I pointed to the overhead dome cam, is synced to my daughter's biometric medical device, and your liability exposure just became traceable. What Maribeth didn't know, what her son didn't see, was that my brother Elias had been sitting 3 chairs back, sipping black coffee under his old Navy boonie hat. Retired SEAL. Surveillance instructor. He clocked the kid's body language before the attack and already had his phone recording long before I turned my back. He didn't intervene because he knew the threshold. He saw a pattern and let it play just long enough to capture cause and effect. And now we had footage, evidence, sound, a full record of what it looks like when an HOA president lets her son endanger a medically fragile child and then blames the victim. This isn't about a chair or a pool or a foam toy. This is about a community that thinks silence is safety. Where are you watching from? Because Brook Hollow's about to learn what it feels like to answer for its quiet. The violation slip was already up on the community board by the time we got home. Not mailed, not emailed, taped. Right there beside the HOA's latest gardening schedule and pool hour reminders, under the glossy laminated poster that read, Brook Hollow Wreath, where order is beauty. I stared at the words on the paper. Resident cited for threatening language, unsafe personal equipment, and disruption of communal space. Further violations may result in suspension of amenity privileges and HOA disciplinary review. Threatening language. That's what she called holding my daughter while she choked. My fingers twitched against the stroller handle. My daughter was sleeping now, her chest rising gently under the mesh canopy. But I could still see the look on her face when the airflow cut off, lips pale, arms flailing, head jerking sideways for breath that wouldn't come. Maribeth didn't care. Not about the medical rig, not about the chair, not about the reality of my child's condition. The whole HOA board had bought into her obsession with visual uniformity and controlled aesthetic standards. Every lawn clipped to a measurement, every porch painted from the same five-tone palette. Any sign of difference, even for medical necessity, became a crack in her porcelain model of control. I didn't pull the notice down. I left it for everyone to see. Because the next time someone scanned that board, I wanted them to know that the narrative was false, and I was already documenting. Inside, I flipped open my case file binder, not for lawsuits, for pattern recognition. Brook Hollow wasn't new to conflict. Last year, a mother named Dana tried to install a small ramp for her son's wheelchair. Maribeth denied it on visual grounds, cited unregulated structural change. That ramp never got built. A few months later, the boy fell coming down the front steps and broke his wrist. No lawsuit, no news. Just a waiver Dana was forced to sign before the HOA would approve community maintenance on her property again. I remembered that. Because I documented it. Not for court, but because that's my job. I'm a municipal liability assessor. I track how environments fail people before insurance companies have to foot the bill. And in places like Brook Hollow, where image takes precedence over function, failure is always waiting beneath the paint. Elias walked in from the patio, holding his phone like it had weight. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. We had enough footage, multiple angles, my shout, the baby's reaction, the noodle. Lanik walking away like it was a joke. I'd seen people like him in my reports before. Teenagers with too much impunity and just enough understanding of consequence to skirt it. The kind that laugh after. Not because they're amused, but because they're certain nothing will happen. Footage is syncing now, Elias said. Camera 2 caught the whole approach. Yours is tighter. Audio's clean. I ran redundancy. I nodded. My hands were shaking a little. Not from fear. Not anymore. From restraint. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. I didn't need revenge. I needed documentation, pressure, leverage. And Brook Hollow had just handed me all three. Across the street, I watched Maribeth exit her car. She had a canvas tote on one arm and her phone against her ear. She didn't glance at my house. She didn't need to. Because people like her, people who control committees, who memorize bylaws and weaponize property codes, they don't fear confrontation. They fear exposure. She wouldn't realize until the audit notice arrived, until the insurer called, until the county risk assessment flagged the HOA's profile for sudden review. Then she'd understand because the oxygen mask was the fuse. But the policy collapsed. That was the explosion. I found Vex behind the pool shed later that evening, sitting on an overturned bucket, half lit by the amber floodlights that kept the courtyard looking serene. He didn't hear me at first, just kept tapping the toe of his shoe against the cement and chewing the corner of his lip. The same corner he bit down on earlier that day, when I caught his eyes right after it happened. "Rough afternoon," I said. He startled, then looked away quickly. "Yeah, real rough." His shirt still had the HOA patch stitched above the breast pocket, but his name tag was missing. Torn off, or taken off, hard to tell. His face was flushed like someone who'd either cried or come close. I leaned against the wall beside him, giving him space. Vex wasn't a kid, but he wasn't far from it. Maybe 21, 22 at most. A part-time lifeguard with a whistle and a clipboard and a summer job that wasn't supposed to involve ethics. But today had broken something. I could see it in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I saw your hand go to the whistle," I said, before she got there, before Maribeth said a word. Vex's foot stopped tapping. "She told me to stay out of it," he said finally. "Said I'd escalate things if I made a scene. Said you'd already been warned." I let that hang in the air between us. "And Lanik?" I asked. "She say anything about what he did?" He shook his head slowly. "She told me it was your equipment's fault, that it was unsafe around other kids, that if I backed her up, she'd log it as a misunderstanding and let it die." "But if you didn't?" He hesitated. "I'm the only certified guard on the weekend shift. She said she'd replace me, said I was overreacting, said if anyone asked I'd tell them it was a splash incident." There it was, the script, the rerouted version, the one that didn't involve oxygen tubes or an infant turning blue in front of half the neighborhood. "You didn't overreact," I said. Vex rubbed his palms over his knees. "I saw her face, the baby, when she couldn't breathe. I I wanted to do something, man, but Maribeth, she's the one who signs off on my hours. She's tight with the property manager. They all back her. And if you said something now? He looked at me then, finally. I'd lose the job and probably get blamed for letting it happen. I nodded once. That's what she's counting on, your silence. Same thing she counted on from Dana last year when her son fell. Same thing she's counting on from the rest of the board. I pulled my phone from my pocket and showed him the paused frame. Lanik, mid-motion, jamming the Noodle forward, blurred from speed, but unmistakable. Elias caught it, the whole thing, every angle, audio too. Vex's face went pale. I didn't know, he whispered. I mean, I hoped someone saw, but... You saw it too, Vex, and that matters. He looked down again. I'm not asking you to go public, not yet. But if this goes to a claims review, and it will, they'll need someone to verify the event occurred. You don't have to take a side. You just have to tell the truth. He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he sat there, staring at the cracked cement between his feet, breathing like someone who just realized silence was a choice, not a shield. The night was warm, crickets louder than usual. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers clicked on, and water arced across manicured hedges. Brook Hollow Reef always looked perfect in the dark. But perfection doesn't matter under audit, and Vex Combs had just stepped out of the shadows. The fine notice hit my inbox at 7:42 the next morning, 350. Violation of pool decorum, failure to supervise minor, use of unauthorized medical apparatus on HOA property. No hearing, no dialogue. Just a link to the payment portal and a warning that non-compliance could result in a temporary ban from shared amenities, including the pool deck, park seating areas, and the community gardens. I reread it twice. They didn't even mention the incident. Not the attack, not the oxygen failure, not my daughter nearly losing consciousness on their pristine concrete deck. Just failure to supervise. I closed the email without responding. It wasn't the dollar amount. It was the narrative. They were already setting it. Not just to justify Maribeth's silence, but to paint me as the problem. And Brook Hollow's board didn't need the truth. They needed a reason. Any reason. The neighborhood app lit up a few minutes later. Subtle comments from residents who never used names, but always knew how to point fingers. Pool drama again yesterday? Some people need to remember these spaces are for everyone, not just for medical theatrics. I don't bring my toddler to work, so maybe others shouldn't bring their emergencies to the pool. That one stung, not because it was cruel, because it was calculated. Brook Hollow had its quiet way of erasing people who made them uncomfortable. I opened my incident tracker and started a fresh entry. Violation ID BW237. Time of citation 0742. Digital timestamp. Confirms notification before any formal incident review. Claim. Obstructive medical equipment. ADA tag 3724 listed. Board member issuing citation. J. Halber, secretary, Maribeth's neighbor and tennis partner. It was procedural muscle memory, but it grounded me. Across the street, two landscapers in matching polos rolled past in a small electric cart. Behind them, Maribeth was walking Lanik to the end of the drive, sipping coffee, casual as ever. She was dressed in crisp linen again, one hand resting on her son's shoulder, like the previous day had been a school fundraiser, and not what it was. Lanik looked bored, unbothered, like he wasn't even thinking about the Noodle or the moment he turned a game into a near emergency. Because he wasn't. Why would he? He lived in a neighborhood where image outranked action, where polished sidewalks and silent boardrooms mattered more than breath and blood. I took a deep breath, clicked save, and stood up. We wouldn't use the pool again. Not for now, but that didn't mean I was stepping back. Because HOA policies are one thing. Insurance liability, that's another game entirely, and Brook Hollow's entire budget depended on one umbrella policy through a regional risk cooperative that required ADA compliance, updated safety infrastructure, and no pending unresolved incident reports involving injury. And that fine they just issued, it was a documented response to an unresolved medical event, one I had already logged, time-stamped, and matched to biometric data through my daughter's pulmonary monitor. All that was left was to push it uphill, but not yet. Not until I had the full picture. I needed to know the system that insulated Maribeth. the names on the board, the ones who nodded in meetings but never spoke publicly, the ones who let their signatures float quietly across warnings and waivers like they weren't tied to real people, real pain. So I made a list. There were 7 active board members. 3 had past complaints filed against them for discriminatory citations. 1 had ties to the local property management group that oversaw landscaping and amenity maintenance. 2 had medical backgrounds. Interesting, because if 2 of them worked in healthcare, then they would know the risk. They'd understand what could happen when an oxygen rig was interfered with, which meant they weren't just compliant, they were willfully silent. Good, because silence can be traced. And once I mapped the chain of authority, once I understood exactly how the board buried incidents like this one, I wouldn't have to argue anymore. I'd just file the report and let the liability adjusters start asking their questions. The certification database was buried 3 clicks deeper than I remembered. The city's public works site had reorganized the forms portal again. Everything routed through contractor dashboards now. But once I found the old archive filter, it didn't take long. Brook Hollow Reef HOA, Community Pool Area, Permit BW 2019-66A. Last ADA Safety Compliance certification expired 18 months ago. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the screen. The report was basic. A routine checklist of handrail integrity, ramp gradient, chemical signage, and designated ADA seating zones. Nothing advanced. Just enough for the HOA to pass annual recertification and keep their insurance rates stable. Except they hadn't renewed. No inspection filed, no request logged, no recertification scheduled, just a silent lapse. That meant the liability waiver I signed, the one they made me scribble on the clipboard before bringing the oxygen cart to the pool, was invalid. They weren't authorized to manage ADA-related risks. They had no standing, no legal shield. I printed the page carefully, quietly. Down the hall, I heard the monitor beep, the soft, steady rhythm from the portable unit beside my daughter's crib, the one that alerted me if her O2 dipped below threshold. We'd added that after the diagnosis, when the doctors told us the fibrosis wasn't reversible, but might stabilize if we caught the stress triggers early. I ran a hand over my face and stood, walking to her room. She was sleeping peacefully, curled toward the edge of the mattress like always, the soft pulse of the humidifier mist curling above her head. I stood there for a minute longer than I needed to. Then I went back to work. I opened a new file on my laptop, Risk Memo Draft, BWBU Show O ADA Incident 1. I wasn't rushing it, not yet. The audit had to be precise. The more methodical my findings, the more impossible they'd be to refute. Violation 1. Use of expired ADA compliance while administering restrictive amenity waivers. Violation 2. Rejection of certified medical device on aesthetic grounds. Violation 3. Documentation of physical interference by board members minor, resulting in distress and possible injury. Violation 4. Issuance of retaliatory. Citationed post-incident without formal review. Each one was cross-referenced, each one time-stamped. And I wasn't finished yet. Elias stepped into the room behind me, carrying a steaming mug in one hand and a notepad in the other. He didn't say anything at first. Just set the notepad down next to the printer. Lannick's behavior pattern matches a profile, he said. 3 previous incidents involving other residents' kids. 1 pushed, 1 water dunk. 1 inhaler incident last summer. Parents signed waivers after being told it was horseplay. I turned slowly. You're sure? He nodded. I confirmed with the Connollys. Their son has asthma. Told me Lannick ripped his inhaler out of his hand and threw it across the lawn. Took Maribeth 3 days to respond. HOA swept it under unsupervised minor scuffle. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. Maribeth wasn't a rogue actor. She was the enforcer of a culture that punished difference, whether it was wheelchairs, oxygen tubes, or brown kids with stutters. If it didn't look like her version of Brook Hollow, it didn't belong, and that made this bigger than a personal vendetta. It made it a pattern of liability. I scanned the notepad Elias left. Names, notes, confirmations. Everything I'd need to support the timeline once the insurance audit request was filed. You ready? He asked. Not yet, I said. One more thread to pull. Because something still didn't sit right. The board's silence, the rapid citation, the lack of review, it was too clean. They weren't just ignoring risk, they were actively burying it. And I needed to know who taught them how. I didn't expect the pediatrician to file a report, but she did. Dr. Kavita Anwell wasn't the kind to stir things up. She spoke in measured tones, kept her clipboard angled, and always double-checked her oxygen readings before speaking. But after the follow-up exam, once she saw the bruising on my daughter's neck where the mask strap had pressed during the airflow block, she didn't hesitate. "I'm required to log this," she said, calm but sharp. Blunt obstruction to a medical breathing device, especially for a pulmonary patient, isn't a minor incident. It's a respiratory assault. I looked down at my daughter's small hands, still curled sleepily in my lap. She was fine now, breathing steady, but it hadn't been fine that day. Dr. Anwell continued, "You'll receive a confirmation letter. I've sent the incident to the county health liaison. You'll also see a copy forwarded to your insurer, since this was equipment related." That meant a chain of records had just started, one I didn't have to initiate. It wasn't just my notes anymore. Now it was a third-party medical professional confirming what Maribeth's son had done, and what the HOA tried to bury under a disruptive parent. When I got home, the letter was already waiting in my inbox. Standard. Format. Time-stamped entry. Subject. Potential interference with pediatric respiratory aid. Minor injury recorded. I forwarded it, first to myself, then to Elias, then to my risk compliance folder, tagged for Brook Hollow Wreath. I hadn't planned to act this fast, but the report changed that. Once a medical flag entered the system, any delay could look like strategic concealment, and I wasn't giving the HOA any more chances to twist the timeline. I called Elias in from the porch. "Start syncing the footage," I said. "We're prepping a full report." He didn't ask if I was sure. He just pulled out his tablet and nodded. We sat in the dining room, documents spread across the table like a war table. Not printouts, raw files, source footage, PDFs, license scans, time-stamped email chains. Even the notification from the neighborhood app where the first resident mocked the incident. All of it mattered, because Brook Hollow wasn't protected by truth. It was protected by framing. If the narrative shifted early, the rest fell into place. Unstable father. Oversensitive? Too emotional to be objective. That's how they dismissed Dana. That's how they gaslit the Connollys. That's how they turned families into whispers before they ever had a chance to speak. But they weren't silencing this. "Start with the structure," I told Elias. 4 violations, 3 support statements, 2 expert sources. Report title? Keep it clinical. Incident-based liability profile. BWHOA ADA Wazier 4. He smirked. "You always name these like you're submitting to a federal agency." Because eventually I am. We worked for hours. I built the incident chain, starting from Maribeth's denial of the medical rig, then the attack, the board's failure to report, the retaliatory fine, and finally the pediatric documentation. Elias pulled the footage and framed it. No editing, no cuts, just clean transitions, original audio, and a floating timestamp overlay that never left the screen. At 1:14 a.m., I clicked save and paused. This wasn't just documentation anymore. This was escalation. Once I filed this with Brook Hollow's insurer and the county ADA liaison, it would trigger a formal liability assessment. If the HOA was found negligent, and they would be, they'd lose their insurance rating. That meant canceled amenities, board sanctions, and an emergency compliance deadline. They wouldn't be able to meet without a full audit. Maribeth wouldn't just lose a vote. She'd lose the structure that gave her power. I walked down the hallway, checked the nursery. My daughter was asleep, her chest rising and falling beneath the soft blue light. I watched her for a long time. Then I sat in the old marshwood chair, the one her father built before he passed, the one they said didn't match the pool's aesthetic. I ran my hand along the carved initials at the base. The HOA had made this personal, but I was done making it. Quiet. I clicked send. I found Vex waiting on the bench near the retention pond, the one just beyond the community's walking trail loop where nobody ever lingered after sunset. He didn't wave when I approached, just shifted his weight, eyes locked on the ripples across the water like they held some kind of answer. "You read it?" I asked. He nodded once. "Saw the report. The footage too." I took the spot beside him, kept my hands folded. No pressure. He had to come to this himself. I didn't know you were going that far, he said finally. Medical reports, footage, timelines. It's not about going far, I replied. It's about going where they never expect us to. Vex blew out a slow breath. Maribeth stopped by this morning, said I needed to be careful, that a false statement could lead to a civil claim. She threatened you? Not directly, just enough to make sure I knew she'd make it my fault if this hit the board. He paused. She said I should think hard about what I saw, that my memory could be off. I didn't look at him. Is it? He shook his head. No, I remember every second. The air between us grew still. She said she had legal cover, he continued, that the board agreed it was just an unfortunate interaction between children. My daughter's not even a year old, Vex. I know, he said quietly. I know what I saw. A long silence followed. In the distance, a couple walked their dog along the far edge of the loop, the leash glowing under a dim solar lamp. Peaceful, controlled, like Brook Hollow always wanted to appear. I wrote a statement, Vex said after a moment. Took me 3 tries. I kept hearing her voice in my head, but I wrote it. He pulled a folded page from his jacket pocket, the edges slightly curled. He didn't hand it to me, just let it rest between us on the bench. I didn't know how much weight it would carry, he said. I'm just a lifeguard. You're the only person on duty when it happened. You're not just a witness. You're the designated safety authority. He blinked at that. Your statement, I added, can validate the entire timeline, can confirm the board's silence, can prove that Maribeth tried to rewrite the event. Vex nodded slowly. She did. I know she did. Then you're doing the right thing? We sat there as the sky faded from purple to ink. Crickets replaced birds. One porch light flicked off across the pond, followed by another. She told me this job could lead to something full-time, Vex murmured. Said she could get me connected to the property management company. She gave you hope so you wouldn't recognize the leverage. He didn't reply. I picked up the paper. It was handwritten, but careful, detailed. He'd listed the time, the layout of the pool deck, who was present, what he saw. There was no emotion in it, just facts, the kind that stand up to review. When do you need it? He asked. Tonight, I said. The report's already filed. This strengthens it, makes it airtight. He exhaled again, this time sharper, like letting go of something held too long. You think she'll come after me? She'll try, but she won't get far. The more she pushes, the more public this becomes. And Brook Hollow survives on silence. She can't afford noise. Vex stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans. Then let's make some. He walked off without another word. I watched him go, the folded paper now in my hand. It wasn't just a witness statement. It was a wedge, and with it, the board's clean narrative just split down the center. By morning, I had the statement digitized, signed, and time-stamped. Vex had agreed to an official notarization through the county's online witness system, which meant there was now no ambiguity. The HOA's designated safety representative had acknowledged witnessing an act that directly interfered with a medically dependent infant, and the board had refused to act. Elias reviewed it once, expression unreadable. He flipped through the rest of the report, sliding pages back and forth like he was checking an arsenal before deployment. You know what they'll say, he murmured. They'll claim you're doing this out of spite. They're right, I said. I just happen to have evidence that lines up with my fury. He didn't smile, but his eyes glinted as he tapped the bottom of the folder. What's the plan? Pressure from above, I replied. They've ignored the state. They've buried internal complaints, but they can't ignore their insurer and the county ADA compliance officer at the same time. Elias stood and crossed to the whiteboard we'd set up in the corner of the living room. It looked like a war room now. HOA board photos on one side, timeline notations down the middle, and legal response deadlines marked in red. He drew a circle around 3 names, Maribeth Drindle, Jay Halber, and Marin Teal. These are your internal fracture points, he said. Marin has medical background. She knows this isn't defensible. Halber signs everything but never shows up in person. And Maribeth runs the optics. If we split them, I said, we break cohesion. We only need one of them to flinch. I opened the insurance portal on my laptop and began assembling the core report. It wasn't a legal document. It was worse for them. It was a claims precursor report, complete with medical attachments, eyewitness confirmation, surveillance footage, and a timeline of administrative retaliation. If accepted, the policy underwriter would launch an immediate internal investigation. At best, the HOA would have to submit to a third-party risk audit. At worst, their policy would be suspended pending resolution, which would strip them of power until reinstatement. And Brook Hollow wouldn't survive a lapse. I packaged everything carefully. Labeling was exact, metadata untouched. I'd spent years training risk teams to spot padded reports and sloppy filing, so I followed every rule I'd ever written. When it was done, I submitted it to 3 places. First, the HOA's underwriter via the whistleblower claims line. Second, the county's ADA enforcement portal, citing failure to maintain safety accommodations. Third, the Office of Community Housing Risk Services, where all neighborhood associations were required to keep updated compliance logs. I hit send, and then I waited. Elias stepped outside to take a call. When he returned, his face had changed. "Marin just contacted me," he said. "She wants to talk, alone." I raised an eyebrow. "Why you?" "She knows I have the footage, and she's tired of covering Maribeth's tracks." I didn't have to ask what that meant. I just nodded and opened a second folder, this one labeled Board Reversal Paths. There were 3 models: full resignation, partial restructuring, or outside trustee management pending legal resolution. "I want her confession documented," I said, "even off the record." Elias tapped his temple. "Wired Mike. Always." We didn't celebrate. This wasn't a victory yet. It was preparation. And Brook Hollow had thrived for years on preparation from the wrong people. Boards that thought paperwork was a shield and silence a virtue. But that silence was cracking now. Because the right pressure, applied from the outside, doesn't just fracture lies, it makes them collapse. The storm broke on a Wednesday. Not rain, not thunder. Just a knock at the HOA office door at 8:17 a.m., followed by 3 men in gray blazers carrying ID badges and clipboards. Brook Hollow's insurer had dispatched a field investigation team. Elias and I watched from across the cul-de-sac, parked in his truck with the windows down just far enough to hear the echo of shoes on concrete. The lead adjuster introduced himself to the office clerk, requested the board president, and handed over a sealed envelope, a formal notice of liability inquiry. Brook Hollow Reith's general liability policy was now under provisional review. Effective immediately, all discretionary board enforcement activities were suspended until the investigation concluded, which meant no more fines, no more amenity bans, no more violation postings. The board couldn't legally act on anything. Maribeth didn't appear for the first 20 minutes. She arrived in a rush, hair pinned and breath tight, flanked by 2 of her loyalists, Halber and a woman I recognized from the landscaping committee. They spoke in hushed tones. Maribeth kept her chin high, but her eyes flicked toward the clipboard in the adjuster's hands again and again, like it was an indictment. It might as well have been. They didn't know I was the one who submitted the report. Not yet. The forms were confidential. But the footage? The timeline? The verified witness statement? That was mine. All of it. I watched as Halber fumbled through a stack of printed minutes. Too late. The auditors weren't here for agendas. They were here for the missing safety inspection, the expired ADA certification, the retaliatory citation against a parent whose daughter couldn't breathe. "They'll try to stall," Elias murmured beside me. "Drag it out, play dumb. Doesn't matter. The inquiry froze their power." Across the street, the adjusters stepped inside the office with the clerk, leaving Maribeth and her shadow team on the sidewalk. She scanned the neighborhood like she could sense someone watching, but her eyes skipped right over us. I didn't flinch. Back at the house, I opened the portal dashboard again. My report had triggered 3 flags: ADA accommodation failure, unreported injury incident, and potential board negligence in safety enforcement. That was enough to justify a full audit. Vex's notarized statement was already confirmed in the digital trail. Elias's footage had passed through 2 verification layers for time integrity. And the pediatric injury report was now part of the county's formal complaint archive. Everything was aligned. By noon, the HOA app had gone quiet. No alerts, no comments, nothing posted to the community board. Then came the ripple. A neighbor texted me, someone I hadn't spoken to since we moved in. "Is it true the pool's shut down?" I replied with 1 sentence. "Ask the board." Another ping. A mother whose son used a sensory walker. "I heard someone filed an ADA claim. Is it safe to say something now?" I typed, "It's safer now than it's ever been. By evening, 5 different families had reached out. Quiet messages, some just a thumbs up. Others with specifics, past conflicts, fines, subtle threats from Maribeth during violation meetings. One even attached a photo of their own citation, yard clutter due to visible breathing machine. That was the pattern. I hadn't invented it. I'd just exposed it. Elias pulled up in the driveway just after dusk, engine cutting smooth. She caved, he said, handing me a flash drive. Marin? She confirmed everything, and she's resigning. Didn't want her name tied to what's coming. I pocketed the drive. That made 2 pillars gone, Marin and Halber. The board wasn't fractured anymore. It was bleeding, and Brook Hollow's silence had finally been broken by its own residents. Because once the truth becomes undeniable, even the loudest lies can't shout it down. The parking lot was full before the sun dipped behind the oaks. For a meeting that wasn't supposed to be public, word had spread fast. Fold-out chairs lined the clubhouse hall, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, some in tennis gear, others in polos, a few still wearing swim goggles pushed up onto their heads. But none of them looked casual. They weren't here for the usual agenda. At the front, the board table was set up as always, 7 placards spaced evenly, flanked by a pitcher of lemon water and the HOA logo banner. But only 4 seats were filled. Marin's chair was empty. So was Halber's. Maribeth sat at the center, back rigid, jaw tight. She wasn't looking at the crowd, she was looking at her notes, pretending she still had control. The lead investigator from the insurer sat in the row behind me. No clipboard this time, just a quiet presence with a plain folder in his lap. His badge hung loosely on a lanyard like he didn't need to flash it anymore. Everyone already knew who he was. Elias leaned against the back wall, arms crossed. No recording equipment visible, but he didn't need it. Everything worth capturing had already been archived. At precisely 6 p.m., Maribeth tapped the microphone. This emergency meeting is called to address concerns brought to the board's attention by external parties, she said, voice clipped and brittle. We ask that all questions be directed through appropriate channels after the meeting concludes. We will not be discussing private matters. You mean the medical assault your son committed on an infant? Someone called from the back. A wave of whispers rolled through the room. Maribeth's lips tightened. This is not the forum for... Then where is it? Another voice snapped. Because it sure wasn't the pool deck. I stood, quietly, calmly. Every eye turned toward me. My name is Corwin Haldor, I said. My daughter is the infant in question. She suffers from pulmonary fibrosis. She requires an oxygen rig in high humidity. Last week, your board president's son shoved a water-soaked foam toy into that rig, obstructing her airflow and sending her into respiratory distress. Silence blanketed the room. Even the ceiling fans sounded loud. I have time-stamped video footage, I continued. I have a notarized eyewitness statement from your lifeguard. I have a pediatric medical report documenting the injury. And I have confirmation that your ADA compliance certification expired nearly 2 years ago. Maribeth opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. The moment your board issued me a violation for bringing medical equipment to the pool, I said, you converted a safety issue into a legal liability. Murmurs began again, faster now. A woman in the 3rd row stood. Is that why the insurance auditors are here? The investigator didn't answer. He didn't need to. Another man near the door stepped forward. We've been cited for everything from garden gnomes to screen door colors, but a baby gets attacked and we're told to keep it quiet. She didn't attack anyone, Maribeth snapped, voice sharp for the first time all evening. Her father is exaggerating for effect. This is a smear campaign. The lights dimmed, then a screen lit up behind the board table. Elias had cued it from the AV booth. No. Warning, no title screen, just clean video. Footage rolled, the pool deck, my daughter in her stroller, Lanik walking up, the foam noodle, the forceful thrust, her body jerking back, me turning, the scream, the oxygen mask slipping sideways, then the audio. She's fine. Boys play rough. Maribeth's voice, crisp, cold. The room went dead still. When the footage ended, nobody clapped, nobody spoke, they just looked at her. And for the first time, Maribeth Drindle looked cornered, not defiant, not indignant, cornered, because power doesn't come from policy binders or printed violations. It comes from silence, and hers had just collapsed. Maribeth didn't speak, not at first. She sat there, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the blank screen behind her, like it would flicker back to something manageable, something deniable. But the footage had done its job, clean, unedited, unforgiving. Someone coughed in the back. Then the scrape of a folding chair as a resident stood. "I've got a daughter with epilepsy," the man said. "We stopped coming to the pool last year after the HOA cited us for unauthorized flotation gear. That gear was medical grade." His voice didn't waver. Another neighbor stood, a woman in scrubs this time. "My husband's a vet. Our service dog was denied access to the clubhouse picnic area. You said he was a distraction to the children. You fined us when we asked for the policy in writing." She didn't even look at Maribeth, just spoke into the air like she needed it out of her body, and then more followed, one by one, not shouting, not dramatic, just residents, parents, grandparents, people who had lived for years under the veneer of perfection Brook Hollow demanded, people who had stories they had folded into silence until now. Maribeth tried to recover. She straightened her notes, adjusted her mic. "This board has always acted in the interest of consistency and community cohesion. We cannot allow isolated events to override the structure we—" "Your structure almost killed a child," a voice snapped from the center row. She flinched. Jay Halber leaned over from his seat beside her, whispering something urgent into her ear, but she shook her head once, sharp like swatting a fly. Her hands tightened on the podium's edge. "I understand there's been a reaction," she said carefully, "but you have to understand how easily things can be misrepresented in this age of viral outrage. The footage shown is contextually limited." "No," I said, stepping forward again. "The footage is time-synced to biometric data, submitted with a pediatric injury report, and supported by an eyewitness. It's not a smear, it's an audit." The room backed me in silence. The insurance investigator stood then. Not dramatically, just slowly, calmly, like this was the step he'd known was coming. "Due to the findings in the incident report and corroborating materials," he said, addressing the board directly, "your HOA's policy has been downgraded to provisional status. Effective immediately, a third-party compliance officer will be assigned to oversee amenity governance and board operations." Maribeth opened her mouth, but the investigator wasn't done. "Furthermore, any board member found to have contributed to retaliatory enforcement or ADA noncompliance may face civil liability exposure as defined by community risk statutes." Now she paled. He turned to the room. "In short, the board has been stripped of autonomous enforcement authority pending full review. Complaints will now be routed through the county liaison's office until resolution." A soft intake of breath passed through the crowd. Someone whispered, "It's over." And it was. Maribeth sat down without a word. Her hands, so quick to gesture and command at past meetings, now trembled as she clutched her notepad like a lifeline that no longer worked. Elias reached me at the side aisle, eyes scanning the room. "Halber's leaving," he murmured. "Packed his briefcase 5 minutes ago. I expected it. He's not the only one." From the board table, another chair scraped back, then another. One by one, the structure Maribeth had ruled from began to collapse, not with drama, but with absence. Vacated power isn't loud. It's quiet. It disappears. I stepped back, returning to my seat without another word, because I didn't need to say anything else. The footage had spoken. The silence had shattered, and Brook Hollow Retha would never rerun the same. The pool was quiet again. Not empty, but quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. No clipboard check-ins, no roaming board members with citation pads tucked into khakis, no unspoken pressure hanging over the umbrellas like fog, just the sound of water moving, children laughing, and the occasional rhythmic pulse of a stroller wheel rolling across the deck tiles. I sat beneath the shade of the Marshwood cradle chair, the same one Maribeth once tried to label non-compliant furniture. My daughter lay beside me, awake and blinking into the soft morning light. Oxygen lines secured, vitals steady. Elias stood by the gate, arms crossed, watching, not guarding, just present. The temporary trustee assigned by the county was handling things now. Community guidelines were under review. The ADA certification had already been reinstated, this time with oversight. Residents were invited to submit their own access concerns directly, bypassing the old board entirely. Maribeth? Gone. She'd submitted her resignation 2 days after the meeting. No apology, no public statement. Just a notice, typed and unsigned, that said she was stepping away to focus on personal matters. But it didn't matter, because the system she built didn't survive her silence. Vex had taken a full-time position with the county parks program. I wrote him a letter of recommendation myself. He stopped by yesterday to say thank you. Said the new HOA manager asked him to help advise on updated safety standards. I told him he already had. Across the pool deck, I saw a woman in a wheelchair guiding her son toward the water. No hesitation, no looks over her shoulder, just motion, free and unbothered. I nodded once, not to her, but to the space itself, the new version of it. I'd kept my promise, not to the HOA, not even to the board, to my daughter, and to the man who built this chair with his hands and sealed it with the belief that she deserved to sit safely in the sun. Brook Hollow Wreath wasn't perfect. It never would be. But now it was different, and sometimes different was enough. I stood and adjusted the shade above her face, watching her smile, soft and small. We weren't moving. We weren't hiding. We were staying. Because silence doesn't keep a community safe. Truth does. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. HOA Karen threw acid at my pregnant wife. Judge gave her 40 years in 40 seconds alive. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?